They are brutal, bloodthirsty, and they kill without remorse.
It was extreme violence. It's someone firing as much, as fast, as hard as they can.
Their victims are often chosen at random.
The life was beaten out of him, and his hands were still in his pockets.
This was a game. This was sport. This was hunting human beings to see what it felt like.
They are all under the age of 19. They are teenage thrill killers. And why they killed, we may never know. Franklin, New Jersey is a close-knit rural community where crime is rare. Yet one gentle spring night 4 years ago, 2 murders were committed there that shocked the nation. They were so brutal and so senseless, they became symbolic of a baffling phenomenon known as thrill killing. The Franklin murders were committed, according to the 2 teenage killers, to see what it felt like to kill. What stunned the Franklin community was that 2 local boys who never committed a serious crime in their lives could even conceive of something so callous and cruel.
It was overwhelming to everyone, I think, in that town, to think that 2 of their own, you know, born and bred in the area, raised there, would then do something to this extreme to 2 other people who were well-liked, well-loved by the whole community.
18-year-old Thomas Koskovich came up with the idea. Then he enlisted the help of his 17-year-old friend, Jason Vreeland. The plan was to kill an easy target, a pizza delivery boy. Michael Briegel later prosecuted the case.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Briegel?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm not sure why Jason Vreeland would want to do this, but clearly Thomas Koskovich had expressed for years to many of his friends that he had always wanted to know what it would feel like to kill somebody.
As darkness fell on April 19th, 1997, Koskovich and Vreeland began dialing the telephone numbers of pizzerias. On the 6th try, they finally found one that would deliver 2 cheese pizzas to an abandoned house. Koskovich, with his .45 automatic, and Vreeland, with his .22, went to the house and waited for their prey. At around 10:30, Giorgio Gallara and Jeremy Giordano took off in their car with the pizzas.
2 men doing their job, driving down a road. It's quiet, it's lonely, it's dark, when all of a sudden it turns from a serene, quiet, routine day into an explosion of violence.
Vreeland realized he knew one of the delivery men, but that didn't stop him or Koskovich from shooting Gallara and Giordano at point-blank range.
Both the victims are trapped, almost like being in a cage in this car. They can't escape. It was extreme violence. It was beyond, you know, shooting someone once, shooting someone twice with a .38. It's someone firing as much, as fast, as hard as they can. When they were fleeing the scene together, they stopped. They almost celebrated that they had just gone through with their plan. They stopped, they hugged, told each other they loved each other.
I think for most of his life he's wanted to kill someone, or at least it's been in his mind.
Koskovich also wanted to get away with it, but police soon found enough evidence to charge the pair with the crime. Their taped confessions revealed that Koskovich had done it for the thrill.
But I think it was more just for the thrill of killing someone.
I was there the night that he confessed to this, and that was another part that made it very shocking for us as detectives. It was almost like he was confessing to such a minor crime.
Koskovich stated simply, "I have no remorse, because I didn't know the people. And when other people die, it doesn't bother me."
Society has to be protected from Mr. Koskovich.
Both Thomas Koskovich and Jason Vreeland are now serving life sentences. Teenage thrill killings are a mystery in more ways than one. There have never been any studies on what in our society creates teenage thrill killers, but we do know some things. The killers are often obsessed with the act of killing. They kill without remorse, whether they know the victim or not. Thrill killers often crave attention. They need an audience, or better yet, partners in crime. James Fox is a professor of criminal justice at Northeastern University.
The issue in many cases is not so much what the relationship of the victims are to the perpetrators, but the relationship of the perpetrators to each other. It's often a case of teenage bonding. Kids committing vicious crimes to feel good about their friendship, to solidify their relationship with each other.
A case involving a group of friends from Fort Myers, Florida, is emblematic of this lethal teenage bonding. One humid night in April 1996, gunshots shattered the peace in this sleepy Gulf Coast town. Mark Schwebees, a music teacher at the local high school, was murdered on his own doorstep, his face blown off with a 12-gauge shotgun. Police charged 4 local teenagers. The ringleader had an apparent dark side, but the other 3 were good students, just weeks away from their high school graduation. To former Lee County Sheriff John McDougal, it's a familiar story. Well-raised, middle-class kids with no criminal record suddenly out on a thrill-seeking crime spree that ends in murder. Take Derek Shields, for example.
If Derek Shields came to my house to date my daughter, this is prior to all of this happening, and left to go to a movie with my daughter, I would have said to my wife, "Oh, there's a nice young man." I mean, that's how he impressed me, as being a nice, all-American boy.
Derek Shields was an A student, full of promise. He had just been awarded a $20,000 scholarship to go to college.
One week I'm looking at getting a letter about the scholarship from Florida Tech, and it wasn't even 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in the county jail for first-degree murder.
Next is Derek Shields.
So it turned out, with a blink of an eye.
Shields, you're charged with homicide in the first degree.
Like Shields, his friend Chris Black was an honor student. Another friend, Pete Magnotti, had a near-genius IQ and talent for drawing.
He had a little wicked sense of humor. Always joked around about satanic stuff. Man was a good artist, very intelligent. He just really didn't associate with too many people in school. You can more or less call him a loner.
But he did have one very close friend, Kevin Foster. He had all the bad boy glamour of a 19-year-old high school dropout who had easy access to guns from his parents' pawn and gun shop. Foster was obsessed with guns. Magnotti, who kept a diary of his thoughts and drawings, explained Foster's appeal to him. If you're a person of small stature like me, it helps to have big friends that own bigger guns.
He was the older guy. He was the guy who could drink and stuff like that. He was interesting, but he was a bit extreme.
Very weird and sinister guy.
The foursome got so close they decided to give themselves a name, the Lords of Chaos. Pete Magnotti even designed a logo for the group.
It's not like we started wearing colors or wearing bandanas or branding or learning handshakes or speaking lingo or throwing signs, none of that. It was just something we liked calling ourselves. I don't know why.
Foster took charge of the Lords of Chaos and gave the members nicknames. Shields, who was originally from New York, was dubbed Mob. Black, who was a little hefty, was called Slim. Foster decided to call himself God.
It was like his decision. It's not like we called him God or had any kind of religious beliefs towards him being, any type of cult leader. We tried to come up with something else. Nothing else fit.
Foster worked full-time for a carpenter. Black, Magnotti, and Shields all had after-school jobs at the local Hardee's. But after work, just like teenagers everywhere, they went cruising for something, anything to do. It wasn't as if they planned to go on a crime spree that would last 17 days.
It starts small, it really does. Like, we had gotten an idea, probably our first little criminal endeavor, we gotten an idea to go on a scavenger hunt. And they had like 20 items you have to go get. The only rule is you can't buy any of it. That's cheating.
From there, the seriousness of their crimes increased. From vandalism to armed robbery to arson. At a local restaurant called The Hut, which had exotic birds on display, Foster torched one of the cages just because the creatures annoyed him.
It was kind of, this is weird, but hey, it's kind of fun. And I think the only reason it was fun is because you were scared at the time.
They'd had a taste of the thrill of breaking the law and getting away with it, and they wanted more. It was becoming a game for them now, and they wanted public recognition for their victories and their criminal bravado. Magnotti, with Black's help, wrote a manifesto, a declaration of war. The Lords of Chaos is a force to be reckoned with. Be prepared for destruction of biblical proportions. The games have just begun and terror shall ensue.
You know, they refer to it as games. So it's like a bunch of kids playing games, but these games were very serious. These games were lethal.
Although they never went public with the manifesto, it marked a turning point for the kids. Now the Lords of Chaos were a force to be reckoned with, not just in the community, but among the members of the group.
They did take on a gang mentality, and they lost sense of their individual conscience.
Now their crimes had to live up to their promise of terror. Black suggested blowing up a local historic landmark, an abandoned Coca-Cola bottling plant. They stole propane gas tanks and lit them with a firebomb. The game had gotten so much bigger than Black expected. He was shaken.
The scope was too large. We had gotten into something where the scope was too big, and it kind of frightened us for a little. No one wants to admit their fear, so everybody thinks it's funny.
They laughed to hide their fear.
Because we're a group and everybody has to support each other, no one can appear to be the weakest link, no one wants to be the soft boy, no one wants to be the squeaky wheel.
6 days later, they robbed the Alva Country Diner, then stole the owner's car and trashed it in a frenzy of destruction. Foster, as usual, did the most damage.
Then as we were walking away, he pulled out a gun and shot it.
It was their next night of terror that sent a chill through this Gulf Coast community that would never be forgotten.
Anytime you have a group of anarchists in a community that have no sense of conscience or have no sense of responsibility for their actions, they can be a very dangerous force to be reckoned with. It's not unlike a pack of wild dogs.
When we return, the Lords of Chaos live up to their wildest dreams, and the phenomenon of thrill killing is traced back to a vicious murder in the 1920s. On the night of April 30th, 1996, the teenage thrill-seeking gang who called themselves the Lords of Chaos decided to go break windows at their local high school. Their fun was interrupted, however, when they were spotted by the music teacher, Mark Schwebies. He had been closing up after an ice cream social. Schwebies told the boys he was going to report them to the school police the next day. Suddenly, the Lords of Chaos were afraid their nights of terror and destruction were over. Foster, the gun-loving leader of the gang, took it the hardest.
He was visibly angry for whatever reason. I guess he didn't want it into his fun or into his little few minutes of fame. What it came down to initially is the idea was thrown up in the air. Like, you know, what if he couldn't talk in the morning?
It was Chris Black who casually came up with the solution to the Schwebies problem.
So I talked to Kevin. I said, okay, here it is. This dude needs to die. How do you do it?
And that's when they started making plans on how they were going to kill Mr. Schwebies. I started telling them, you don't need to do that.
Shields not only knew and liked Schwebies, he played keyboard in his jazz band. But Shields' protests were lost on the group. The Lords of Chaos were already getting charged up for the kill. Psychologist Lawrence Steinberg.
One of the things that we see when we study kids in groups is that very often the group dynamic can get out of hand. Sort of the group behavior takes on a life of its own. Very often things just kind of spin out of control and the kids can't stop it.
Kevin Foster laid out his deadly plan.
Kevin had decided that, yes, this dude was, here's how he was going to do it. He was going to go to his house, get the door open, shoot him, and then leave him there. And then that was it.
Foster decided Black would drive. Magnotti would watch from the back seat, and Shields would knock on Schwebies' door.
But when we got up to the door and I knocked on the door, Schwebies didn't come at first, so I turned around to leave, and Foster's standing there with a gun leveled at my head. And at the same time, Sweebies opened the door.
Mr. Sweebies looked out the door to see who was there and saw one of the students. So they played on that element of trust.
And everything just went down too fast for me. I took off running.
Then up walks Foster with a shotgun and shoots him in the face.
And I hear 2 shots.
With a 12-gauge Mossberg pump shotgun, Foster blasted Sweebies in the face. Sweebies fell, and Foster shot him again. He couldn't wait to tell the others how cool it was to have seen Sweebies' face blown off.
Yeah, he was bragging about it. I guess he was proud of himself for, I guess having I guess his words were big enough nuts to shoot somebody.
Randall McGruther prosecuted the case.
Kevin Foster, I think, took real joy in the crimes that were committed, and I believe from the evidence that was presented that he took real joy in the killing.
Foster even bragged about the killing to a friend who later told police. 2 days after the murder, police arrested the quartet as they were on their way to commit another crime. All 4 boys were charged with first-degree murder. Although Kevin Foster had pulled the trigger, neither Chris Black, who came up with the idea, nor Derek Shields, who knocked on Sweebies' door, were innocent bystanders. Former Sheriff John McDougall.
Derek Shields knew the teacher. He was a member of the band. And so for him, I think the burden of guilt is much greater because of the fact that he basically played the role of Judas. I mean, he did everything but go up and kiss him on the cheek.
Black, Shields, and Magnate pleaded guilty. Kevin Foster held out for a trial. But all the other Lords of Chaos testified against him.
Then I heard a gunshot, and then I heard another gunshot.
Who was the man that returned immediately after you heard those shots with the shotgun in his hands?
Kevin Foster. What did he say?
He gave a little chuckle, and then he said, "He's sure the hell ain't alive."
The defendant is hereby sentenced to death.
Kevin Foster received a death sentence. Chris Black and Derek Shields were sentenced to life in prison. Pete Magnate got 32 years. Still, the question remains, what made all these good kids turn bad and join in the killing?
Acceptance would be the best word, but it's not really correct. It's wanting to be a part of something, but it's being a part of something bad as opposed to being a part of something good. It was recognition. People like to be known for things, even if they're bad.
The exception of Foster, who I believe is a sociopath. Looking at these other members, I don't think any one of them would have, on their own, committed these crimes. But as a group, they became very powerful.
James Fox is a professor of criminal justice at Northeastern University.
In the presence of friends, teenagers will often do things they would never do on their own. They can participate in the most brutal, grotesque, sadistic, hideous cases of homicide because they have their friends there to help justify it and to encourage them.
According to Fox, where there is more than one killer, there is usually a mastermind like Thomas Koskovich or Kevin Foster. The followers are so in awe of their leader, they gladly take part in a thrill killing to prove their allegiance. The first time this senseless kind of killing troubled the nation was during the Roaring '20s. It was the case of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb. They were the handsome, pampered sons of Chicago millionaires. The 2 friends had grown up in the same posh neighborhood and gone to college together. Both of them had genius IQs and were brilliant enough, or so they thought, to commit the perfect murder. Today, Leopold and Loeb are remembered as the pair whose brutal crime gave birth to the term teenage thrill killers. Their plan was to disguise a killing as a kidnapping. They would even demand a $10,000 ransom, knowing the victim, chosen at random, would already be dead. Loeb was the mastermind. Leopold went along because he literally idolized his friend. On the afternoon of May 24th, 1924, they spotted 14-year-old Bobby Franks walking home from school. Leopold and Loeb offered him a ride. Moments later, they smashed his head with a chisel, let him bleed to death, and hid the body. Police found it stuffed in a drain pipe. Both Leopold and Loeb eventually confessed, and although they may have been looking for a thrill, Leopold said in his confession that killing was as commonplace as sticking a pin in a beetle. The public was both horrified and fascinated with their stunning lack of remorse. They demanded an eye for an eye. It took legendary defense lawyer Clarence Darrow, in what the press dubbed the trial of the century, to save the teens from the death penalty. Today, cold-blooded teenage thrill killings are much more common, according to experts. The number of senseless killings of strangers by teenagers has nearly doubled in the last 15 years. Thrill killing often goes beyond killing for fun to killing for sport. Next, the game of thrill killing. Thrill killings, among the most senseless killings of all, are not so much about taking a life as having fun and playing a game. Death is simply scoring a point. Professor James Fox recently wrote a book on making sense of senseless murders.
When you look at senseless teenage murder, frequently there are others around. It's a group activity. Not only is it a thrill killing, it's a team sport.
Take the case of these three friends from St. Paul, Minnesota: Jonathan McNeil, Dale Stewart, and Dan Angus.
What happened in this case was really a deadly mix of three individuals who seemed to have no conscience and decided that they were going to kill for sport.
Susan Gertner is the Ramsey County attorney.
I can't remember a case so chilling, where the killing was so needless, so ruthless, and where a victim was so innocent.
It started with a plan to rob someone. Jonathan McNeil, who just recently met Stewart and Angus through a girlfriend, says he didn't think they would really commit a robbery, but he played along.
Dan and Dale wanted to ride around and, find a person to rob. So, I did that. I drove them around, still thinking it was BS.
While they were all thinking robbery, Angus, the leader of the pack, began to toy with another idea.
Then slowly, I don't know how it even got into the next part of it, because it went from robbing to shooting someone if they had to during a robbery. And then it went from there to straight killing somebody.
Straight killing. They drove around looking for a target. They even fired practice shots out the car window. Finally, someone came into their sights. It was Tony Basta, a total stranger.
I was driving. I was actually on my way to go home to drop them off, and they just spotted this guy. And they're like, well, let's get him, let's get him.
Tony Basta, 17, was a high school student who loved bicycling. Every night he rode his bike along the banks of the Mississippi River. This night, August 26, 2000, McNeil's car ran right beside him.
I should have thought, well, hell, I should just take a left here and still go home, but then it didn't even come to my mind. And that was where kind of peer pressure came in, because they were just like, come on, move out, come on, go. Just like, okay, let's go.
As Angus egged him on, Stewart shot the boy point blank as if he were a target in a shooting gallery.
Looked at my review and, kind of saw him stumble. I saw him stumble and fall, so I was just like, oh, okay.
The last thing they heard Tony Basta say before he died was, ouch. After the killing, they brought Angus's girlfriend to the scene to show off their handiwork and have a good laugh.
They're happy that they accomplished their mission. So they just kind of rejoiced on each other. They wanted to do it again, but, they're just, they were joyful.
They now had an inside joke. Every time one of them said ouch, like Tony Basta, they all laughed uncontrollably.
Well, you had to be there. That's all I can say.
Jonathan McNeil was sentenced to 25.5 years. Dan Angus and Dale Stewart got life.
This was a game. This was sport. This was hunting human beings to see what it felt like.
Not unlike the Lords of Chaos, who stated in their manifesto, "The games have just begun." These killers also saw murder like a game. In the Basta case, seen in this graphic reconstruction, it was almost as if they literally translated a video game into real life and death.
When you say, why do kids kill, oftentimes it's why not? They oftentimes don't see any reason not to kill. It seems like fun. After all, they've been entertained by murder through their video games and television shows.
One kind of thrill killing takes the game and the team sport to their extremes. It is a lethal wilding. The term wilding was first used to describe a near-deadly attack on a jogger in New York's Central Park in 1990 by a group of marauding teens.
8 o'clock, we were going to go wilding. Wilding?
Yes. Last year in the Seattle area, there was a rash of wildings. This beating of a 44-year-old man was caught on a tape, later given to police. But it was mild compared to the brutal death of a man in nearby Tacoma. Police spokesman Jim Mathias.
He took 20-some blows, to the head, after they had him down on the ground. And that, it's a very, extremely vicious attack.
Even more shocking was the fact that the accused killers of 30-year-old Eric Taves weren't just a pack of teenagers. Some were children, as young as 11 years old. In all, this gang of kids was involved in nearly a dozen attacks near a local park.
They would meet, from the information we got, they would meet at the school, talk about going out and finding somebody to beat up, and it was just purely for the thrill.
Their final thrill came one August night last year after a barbecue. Terrence Hunt, the oldest, suggested they go out on the prowl for a victim. When the pack of 8 kids found Taves, they all stumped him. It was just like the Seattle beating, but here the 11-year-old also used a stick. Hunt later bragged he had knee-dropped Taves in the face 28 times.
Hey, I'm at North 4th and Division. Some kids just beat up guys laying in the street.
A relative of 2 of the suspects tried to make sense of the killing.
And I know they didn't set out to kill nobody. They followed big brothers, they followed their friends, they followed the neighborhood kids who they thought was cool.
It's a group activity, and what takes over group dynamics. So none of the participants may have wanted this kind of outcome, but they fed off each other. And oftentimes you find in cases of wilding an excessive amount of brutality, overkill, that each person's trying to prove to their friends how tough they are.
Lawrence Steinberg is a professor of psychology at Temple University.
Susceptibility to peer pressure peaks at around age 13 or 14. And so kids who are at that point in development find it very, very hard to extricate themselves from a bad situation that is in motion.
So the youngest may have had the most to prove and the most difficulty pulling away from the group. Now 6 of the boys are facing trial. 2 already pleaded guilty. While teen thrill killers generally murder in groups, there are lone thrill killers, and they are perhaps the most disturbing of all. More when we return.
Thought that out very well. Bringing it back to a friend is how it ended up.
Thrill killers are often propelled to kill by a group of friends who encourage them. It's as if killing were a team sport. Bragging and showing off are all part of the game. Experts say thrill killers who murder alone also like an audience, but they tend to be more antisocial and disturbed. Lawrence Steinberg is a psychology professor at Temple University.
A teenager who commits murder by himself is likely to be more troubled and more psychologically disturbed than a teenager who does the same thing in a group context.
We have a young man who from his early years appears to have been a loner.
Rod Matthews was a frail, quiet 14-year-old boy. No one imagined he would face murder charges at that age. Matthews was one of the first children to be tried as an adult. The victim's mother, Jeannie Quinn, led the fight to have the case heard in criminal court.
He's not a juvenile, he's a murderer. That's the issue. First-degree murder. Premeditation, cold and calculated.
On a snowy day in November 1986, Rod Matthews lured 14-year-old Sean Willett into the woods near his Canton, Massachusetts home to build forts. Matthews, who wasn't wearing snow boots, asked Ouellette if he could follow in his footsteps. Ouellette never saw what was coming. Matthews took a baseball bat and beat him over the head.
Allow me to show you exhibit number 3.
The life was beaten out of him, and it was all from behind. When they found Sean, his hands were still in his pockets. He couldn't even get his hands out of his pockets to protect himself.
Would you examine them, please, and tell us...
All these details were known at the time. They came from his confession, but more came out at the trial. Matthews had been planning the murder for a month. He even sent a note to a high school teacher who read it at the trial.
Hay down at the pits. It was in flames about 8 feet high. The other kids with me thought I was crazy. Lately, I've been wanting to kill people I hate, and I've been wanting to light houses on fire. What should I do?
Matthews discussed his plan with two friends, Jonathan Cash and Robbie Peterson.
He wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. He said he was going to kill Sean to see what it felt like. And then he didn't think anybody would miss him.
What can you tell us about that?
At least 3 people had known Matthews had murder on his mind. None of them took him seriously. That is, until the day of the murder.
Have you seen this before?
Matthews took his friends up into the woods to show them the battered corpse. He couldn't resist bragging about what he had done. In this respect, he was no different than Kevin Foster, Thomas Koskovich, or Dan Angus. Ironically, it was the bragging that led to their arrests. By most standards, Matthews' crime, tried in an adult court, would have been first-degree murder, punishable by life in prison or death.
Rod Matthews, the defendant before you, is guilty of murder.
But the jury felt the freckle-faced kid was too young. They found him guilty of second-degree murder. He would be eligible for parole after serving 15 years of his life sentence. His parole hearing was scheduled for 2001, but he'll have an uphill battle with the parole board.
And I'm going to fight with every inch of my strength that's left in me, as well as others, to keep him locked up, hopefully for good.
Matthews tried to turn the tide of public opinion in this 1994 interview.
Best from the public point of view is that I'm a monster and got no remorse and don't have any feelings for anybody. And that's just the opposite of who I am.
Matthews' impassive delivery made his statement less than convincing to many, including Ginny Quinn.
I believe that Rod Matthews is not capable of any kind of remorse. He never had any remorse in the first place, and you can't be taught or given a conscience.
Whatever Rod Matthews' ultimate fate, the question remains, do the youngest killers really know what they're doing? Are they really old enough to have a conscience? And is a 14-year-old killer any less to blame?
We'd want to know things like, did he know right from wrong? But we want to know more than that. We'd also want to know, if he knew right from wrong, did he have the psychological capabilities to stop himself from acting in a certain way?
James Fox attended Matthews' trial.
Rod Matthews knew right from wrong. All of these kids are talking about know right from wrong. They just don't care.
Many times a child will know right from wrong, but will go ahead and do the thing that's wrong because he can't stop himself. We do know that, that people become less impulsive and more able to control their behavior between the ages of, let's say, 13 and 16. But no one really knows with any more precision than that where we should draw the line.
14-year-olds do not understand consequences at the same depth that adults do. Sure, he knows that when you kill someone, they die and they never come back. What he may not have fully understood is the impact that that would have on Sean Ouellette's family, as well as his own family.
One reason it's hard to pin down the age of reason and responsibility lies in the front of the brain, the part of the brain that regulates impulse control, planning, and judgment. In a young adolescent, it's probably not fully developed yet.
This is a region of the brain that is continuing to develop in very, very important ways throughout the adolescent years, even into young adulthood, we think. So to the extent that teenagers seem to be less able to control their behavior, less planful, less able to see into the future, we're beginning to understand what some of the biological bases of those developmental differences might be.
This claim leaves a 14-year-old like Rod Matthews right on the borderline between ignorance and understanding. In his opinion, Steinberg says this is the kind of information that should be taken into consideration by the courts.
So it's not so much that the punishment should fit the crime, it's that the punishment should fit the offender's level of maturity.
2 decades after Rod Matthews committed his brutal murder, a similar thrill killing stunned a Connecticut town. Some experts say the killer, who was 18 at the time, may even be more depraved than Matthews. When we return. 2 decades after the thrill killing of Sean Willett by 14-year-old Rod Matthews, another deadly incident occurred in Waterbury, Connecticut that was eerily similar. However, this killer, Todd Rizzo, was 18, and he didn't just want to impress his friends. He wanted to be famous. Experts say a killer Rizzo's age is likely to be a lot more calculating and culpable than a young killer like Matthews. When Todd Rizzo was in his early teens, he was an angel-faced boy, known around Waterbury as a good kid.
He had a great sense of humor. He was very funny and kind of fun to be around and have in the store. He was always cracking jokes.
Carmine Capobianco liked him so much, he took him under his wing and let him work in his video store. Rizzo was also great with the kids who came in.
Todd loved kids. He loved to be around my kids, any kids that came in here. He took to kids.
According to Rizzo's brother Brandon, the local parents loved to have Todd babysit.
He was a church, community-oriented individual, and so they looked at that as a role model of sorts for, you know, their children, and they trusted him.
Then something changed that still remains a mystery to friends and family.
He's been coming over and playing with their kids, and then all of a sudden he comes over one day and his hair is black and his eyes are purple. That's still Todd, you know. It's just a darker phase, and that's pretty much all it was ever perceived to be. This is Todd when he first started going through his darker phases, where he would color his hair and the ear piercings and the contact lenses. This is his tattoo. He actually had that designed.
He would rent these kind of movies, Faces of Death, which is actual documentary footage of people being killed and mutilated, animals attacking humans, things along those lines. They came out with a series of...
That was a video Rod Matthews liked too. But Rizzo took his obsession much further. He began collecting serial killer articles, books, and tapes. By the time he was 18, he had a complete scrapbook of Jeffrey Dahmer clippings.
He begged me to take that.
He would make roundabout comments, basically to the effect of one day, you know, when I'm a serial killer, but he would say it with a smile and a laugh, and you know, you wouldn't think nothing of it.
The last movie that he rented from me is Paradise Lost, and this is a documentary about some child murders.
On September 29th, 1997, 13-year-old Stanley Edwards was riding his bike past Todd Rizzo's house. Rizzo, with his knack for getting along with kids, befriended Edwards and then invited him into his backyard to look for snakes.
This is the backyard, my backyard, and there's this general area here is where pretty much happened.
There, Rizzo pulled out a 3-pound sledgehammer and bludgeoned Edwards to death.
Remorseless,
John Connolly later prosecuted the case.
It's just a brutal, vicious murder, and for no apparent reason, the only motive being, again, that Rizzo wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. And indeed, he got to know what it felt like to kill someone, and kill someone brutally.
Just like Rod Matthews. But Todd Rizzo was 18 and probably old enough to know full well what he was doing and why he wanted to do it. Rizzo, with the characteristic matter-of-fact tone of a thrill killer, simply stated, "I decided I wanted to try and kill him for no good reason."
Pretty much a ladies' man.
Rizzo's brother said he wanted to be as famous as Jeffrey Dahmer.
He wanted to, you know, basically say, I'm from such and such, you know, nowhere town, and look who I become.
Some would say Todd Rizzo became evil incarnate. Dr. Daniel Amen, however, says he feels it's time we start looking at murder as a biological issue.
We've now done about 7,000 brain studies, and what we see that our violent acting children have different brains than people who never act violent.
He consistently sees brain defects in his violent subjects, among them some 50 murderers.
They have overactivity in a part of their brain called the cingulate gyrus.
When this area of the brain works too hard, the individual has obsessive thoughts. This may explain why so many thrill killers like Rizzo and Matthews obsess about wanting to kill someone just to see what it feels like. Dr. Amen's work could also explain why these killers can't stop themselves before it's too late.
They have very poor activity in their prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain right in the front, part of your brain that's involved with judgment, planning, impulse control.
In addition to these biological reasons for killing, researchers have also found psychological ones. Thrill killing can be seen as mental illness. Psychologists have a checklist of traits seen in psychopaths. These traits could easily describe Todd Rizzo and Rod Matthews. And for that matter, Kevin Foster, Dan Angus, and Thomas Koskovich. They are egocentric, lacking in empathy, lacking in remorse, and lacking in self-control. Psychology professor Lawrence Steinberg has a warning.
We ought to be very careful because some of the things that we use to diagnose psychopaths in adulthood are things that appear in normal teenagers.
As odd as it may sound, the psychopathic behavior that makes a teen kill could just be a phase they're going through.
Now, when we see these things in adults, they're very troublesome signs. But when we see them in kids, we don't know if they're troublesome or not. Some of these things are things that kids grow out of.
For all the recent research on kids and violence, there is still no way to predict who will become a thrill killer.
If you look at the background of Rod Matthews, he probably fits thousands of other kids out there across America who never will kill. We cannot identify and predict the next juvenile murderer. That's what's so frustrating about it.
Airline salutes the passengers who make flying a real trip.
If they would have called my name, I would have heard it.
Who are you to judge me and say I'm abbreviated?
This is what it feels like when you sit behind me all the time.
See more passengers unloading on Airline. Next on A&E.